of what we're doing when we're teaching in history classrooms is teaching students about evidence and how to weigh evidence and how to seek various points of view. And that's a lot of people who haven't taken a history course in many decades and are remembering their high school experience, remember, as Kim said before, these kind of yes or no fact type questions. And a lot of our freshmen coming in imagine that that's what history is, and that's why they didn't like it so much in high school. But most of what we're doing is really stressing the idea that history is interpretation and that there are multiple interpretations of any given historical era or period, and we're trying to make students much more aware of that even that supposedly encyclopedic textbook that they had in high school, that had a point of view. And how do you discern what the point of view is? How do you discern what the agenda is? And really evaluate that and weigh the different sides.
All right, another question right here.
What bothered me especially is slogans, like "Make America Great Again" or "Obamacare is broken." There's no discussion about it. That's it. It's black and white. Either, and I just get so frustrated. Let's have a discussion. Let's talk about it. But it's after a while. Yeah, I think the question is. I think there is a history. Discussion is bringing up history and looking at a broad picture. But the question is slogans. Slogans. I'm so tired of it. Can we hear real discussions instead of it's black and white, either or, you're for or against.
Is there a way that we can is there something that we as historians can do to get past these slogans and get more of these discussions going? Thoughts about that?
Just off the top of my head, I share your frustration, and I think, one could imagine a whole set of interesting questions that if you were to take slogans as its own kind of primary source and then give it to students and say, what can you do with this? Can we look at past slogans, of past presidential administrations? It kind of gets back to analogies and comparisons, but have we ever encountered these kinds of slogans in the past? Who wrote these slogans, right? Is it a political consulting firm? Is it written because it's going to win an election, or is it written because there's actually ideology behind it? There's a whole set of interesting, this is just a way of me dealing with the frustrations of the political moment, but to kind of step back and think about it more in a critical way, which is not always fully satisfying, but I think it's good for students in the classroom.
It seems like what's happening a lot is kind of this anti-intellectualism, and it's not just history, social science, and physical science. So how can we get away from this trend towards anti-intellectualism?
It's a great nothing. Boy, we've got barn burner questions. Yeah, how do we get away from anti-intellectualism? Kim, I'm gonna actually ask you this question. Because I think in your work, both your written work as well as the many public presentations that I've seen you do, you are really, really good at this, at being an approachable intellectual. And I wonder if you could sort of talk about how you do that. How do you come into an environment like this and feel comfortable teaching people really complex stuff, but making them feel comfortable in that environment? Because I think that might be part of what the anti-intellectualism is that, oh, you've got these nerdy intellectuals that can't really be accessible and they can't make the research accessible to anybody. But I think you've done a great job in that, and I wonder if maybe you could talk about that.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, and your check is in the mail often. I think it's that when you have a passion about something, it's possible to communicate that, and I find that I'm the luckiest person in the world because I get to invite students to get the tools to get that for themselves. And I believe that part of the reason I have a passion is because my field is women's history, women's voices have not been represented. And so I stay awake at night thinking about, the voices that I can't write about, or that, the book can't be 200,000 words, because then no one will. But I think we have a passion for what we do. This is why we're here. And that to communicate that is to say that this is a way to connect with people who felt very differently in the past, but their experiences matter. It's to really go against the silences and to say, we're uncovering these voices. But I also think that history is just great fun. It's so cool. Nerdiness is cool. But there's a negative way that's not approachable, and I think that comes from not feeling or feeling that there are 5 people in the world who should be able to pronounce on that. And I want to get back to your question. I've worked really hard to be a historian, and I don't discount the work that everyone has done here. It's a lot of work. Does that mean that I don't think that others can be historians? No, I believe that they can. And when they get excited about the detective work that we do and do more and more of that, I think they have even more that they have to say. So I don't think it's an exclusive club, but I also think that it matters that we have done our work, that we have spent the time trying to research, and to communicate that is to reach out from the 5 days we've spent this week writing and connecting with people finally and saying, this is so cool what I have found, right? That this today I found this. And so I think that there's just that sense that there is social justice involved in bringing those experiences and those voices to us. To me, the responsibility that you talked about is the responsibility of letting those voices be heard through an imperfect filter, the absolutely vastly perfect filter of what we do, what I do as a historian. But there's something very powerful about that, and I think I feel that students really connect with that, and particularly we've been talking about using primary sources, using opposing viewpoints. I teach World War I, and there are a lot of slogans. There are a lot of slogans that people challenge. So finding that way, I think just, to me, having a chance to present in occasions like this is so cool. Few people read some people read our books, but it's so cool to connect with you in this way.
Time for some more questions? I thought I saw
Your talk about primary sources, the first class we had in law school was developments of legal institutions. And the book was by Professor Crow, and he wrote about what? Colonial charters, the origin of the common law, and how these things related now and how it was followed up to the present day. When the role of history and the professions, especially the legal profession or even the medical profession, any of the accounting, we're trying to straighten out what the accountants do. You go back and look at how they got that way. When I've been reading a book which was called Impeachment, and the book was a history of impeachment, starting with the way in which the common law impeached British judges back in the 1500s, and how that carried through to today. Now that's really relevant. It's also relevant, last night heard Doris Kearns Goodwin talk about what happened in Watergate. Well, if you talk to students about Watergate, that was 3 years ago. They were not around. Their parents may not have been around. And consequently, when Doris explained what was happening in terms of Watergate, especially with what happened last night, and you took up and you have Beschloss and Meacham they give context to what's happening today. So in addition to what you learn about before, you also have to take more recent events to understand what's happening today. And somebody said if the president fires Mueller and he fires a new FBI chief and Rosenstein doesn't do it, if he does it on a Saturday night, we know what will happen. Well, that doesn't mean anything to these kids because they've never heard of a Saturday night massacre.
One survey class at a time, that's all we've got.
So that's why history is important, not only to historians, but for what it teaches.
And just a quick shout out, some of the best primary sources that we've all used have been legal cases because it's a conflict that gathers voices that never would have been preserved before. So, thank you, lawyers.
Lawyers don't get thanked often.
It's important.
Do you have any other questions?
So like, we were kind of talking about slogans, we were talking about packaging, we were talking about how things are sort of marketable to people, and how that sort of comes in conflict with this idea of historians as pundits, and the idea of historians as like responsible for marketing like complex nuances rather than like cheap analogies. So like, I guess like to what extent is it the historian's responsibility or is it the citizen's responsibility? Like, how do you make that transition from some sort of cheap, marketable, easy to consume idea like make America great again, or versus like the much more complex idea of let's make certain things great again, but also like get rid of a bunch of them. Also move on. Like, is that the historian's responsibility to make things more marketable? Is it the citizen's responsibility to like become more nuanced in of their own views, or how do you like sort of combat that?
That's a great question. Andra, did you have some thoughts on that?
Just a few small ones. It seems like your question gets into the terrain of just political action, right? You know, what news sources, what press outlets exist, right? Are we supporting them or not? You know, and not only just what we can do as citizens, but I mean, there's a lot in between historians doing all of our really hard and time-consuming and complex work, and then the slogans or what people might read if they read 2 articles a day, and so there's that. There's also education, right? Funding for education, so all the I think your question gets into not only what historians have a responsibility for, but just generally what we as citizens have a responsibility to do and to support to have a better educated citizenry.
This isn't quite at the depth of your question, but I always ask my students for the title of their papers. It has to be an excellent title that captures the thesis of their paper. And I put a lot of weight on the title because I think that really should show the nuance. And so if we could encourage people to write complex slogans, that actually, I think it can be done. My father was an advertiser, I have to admit. But you know, I think putting a lot of thought into the title of your work makes you think about, okay, how can I deliver this argument quickly and indicate what I'm arguing? The argument has to be embedded in that title. But I also think the question of asking questions, so if someone says about slogans, make America great again, it's simple to just say, well, what was great? What are you identifying as great? How are you going to make that thing great? So following up questions. When people give you slogans, follow up with questions.
We have time for one more question over here.
I have the last word. Montesquieu, the great French philosopher, in his book called The Spirit of Laws, said that all generalizations are false, and so is this one. Now, by their very nature, historical analogies have some degree of falseness. Very few historical analogies fit 100%. So, should historians use historical analogies as a pundit? Perhaps yes, perhaps no. Once they step past the analogy, the historical analogy, and they become a pundit, do they then become a social and political advocate on a general or very specific question? And the last thing I'll say, are you qualified to do that? And an example would be our American economic historians. They can draw analogies between the Hawley-Smoot Tariff of 1929. Mr. Hawley was former president of Willamette University, and that was a main factor in throwing us into the Great Depression. Now, a historical analogy would be a tariff situation has been already suggested by the administration. So that using that analogy as an American economic historian, am I qualified to advise the government, the Federal Reserve Board, our trade negotiators, and so forth, as a historian?
I do have a response. So I guess I'll take a piece of your question, and I got a confession to make. I'm not a historian. I'm actually an anthropologist, so I just do history, so I'm like a little age historian. So, but in my looking at history, I was very incensed some years ago at the fact that a lot of our Native histories are not written. And I was very upset to not see them in history books. And I took that to the Smithsonian. I did a whole presentation about how historians have known this stuff for so long, yet they don't write it in history books, and they kind of make it all invisible. And I was very mad when I did that presentation because of the subject, and because I'd just gone through this rainstorm outside. I was like completely soaked, because they have these like monsoons currently in DC. But anyway, I was taken to dinner that evening by two historians from the Smithsonian. They were very interested in a lot of the subjects I brought up, and one thing they brought up is, as soon as you write history, it's irrelevant, because every moment we're discovering new histories, we're writing our histories, and everything we do becomes history in the next moment. And so sources that were not available 50 years ago are available today in archives, and historians and anthropologists are writing those histories newly because now they're available or they weren't available before. So history is always the sort of process of creating almost a redundancy.
Yeah. As an economic historian, I could pronounce some of those things.
But I think, Fred, you're actually in kind of a unique position, or at least you have unique training or unique abilities in this respect. I think most historians, the question that Tom asked was basically, do you have any business in the governor's office or in the Oval Office? If you got the call today to go in there and opine or provide advice on a particular topic, would you be ready for that? Fred, you would. I know that much. I would be terrified. I would be absolutely terrified. But that I don't think lets me out of this responsibility that I have to answer that call and provide what I can in terms of historical context and provide apt historical analogies that I also sort of qualify. Okay, so yes, we saw something like this before. Here's what happened. Here were the differences. So it's not going to happen exactly the same way, and we can't respond in exactly the same way, but we do have some framework that we can use with on this. But I don't think that that's actually something that we're all that well trained to do or prepared for. Certainly I am not.
just a very interesting sort of parallel to the economic history and would you offer advice in the governor's office is, I mean, I think about this a lot in my own research, kind of looking at the Cold War and the role of expertise in the Cold War, and so thinking about the role of social scientists who espouse this modernization theory, this idea that all nations would develop along the same linear path as the United States. And they were actually involved in government administration and thinking about the Vietnam War and our U.S. foreign policy. So I think about this a lot, but then that just makes it I sort of feel like we have a responsibility to be involved in the public sphere as intellectuals, but if I got the call to actually be a consultant, I would be thinking about the historical actors that I've studied, and it would make me feel very wary.
Yeah. Well, and rightly so, and I think that's actually a mark of a good historian. And we've talked about this before. A good scholar, someone who can sort of say, here's what I know, here are the limits of what I know, here's what I can offer you, here are the things that I can't really offer you. I'm looking at the time, I think we've offered you perhaps enough tonight. Thank you again for being part of the History in the News experience. Stay tuned, we'll have another one in August, the third Thursday of the month, 5:30 p.m. here in the Dye House. Can we please thank our roundtable one more time?
I would also like just to take a moment and thank Bob for all the work that went into creating History in the News. We've worked on it for a year, but I think we've been talking about it for far longer. And I just want to thank you so much for really making history living. And you've brought a lot to historians and to people in the community and really invigorated my faith in what it means to be a citizen and a historian and Salemite. And so I wanted to thank you. And best of luck. And thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. See you next